Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing television discussions, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of Ashford Meadow.
In this episode, we're discussing the first season of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Let's get into it.
Alright, so the first season of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has just wrapped up on HBO. Last night we gathered round and watched the finale. Maggie, summarize your impressions of this season in just a few words.
One of the greatest things I've ever seen. Is that too hyperbolic?
No.
I thought it was pretty excellent and flawless and fantastic. I loved this.
I mean, the word that comes to mind for me is relief.
Yeah.
Because every week I enjoyed it more. I mean, I was there from the first second of the first episode, but I kept enjoying it more and more, which meant that every week I was filled with this dread for 6 days.
I know, I was like, oh, I hope it's good. I hope it's good, because we've been so burned by the second half of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. And so like we've been so anxious about this world and adapting this world, especially because we just read the book and loved it. So we were so nervous, but I was never let down once, even when the show wasn't always what I expected it to be.
Or not always perfectly one-to-one adapting the book.
Right. This was like an amazing adaptation, but there were also quite a lot of changes, but I thought they only added to the good adaptation. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
I think it went 6 for 6, which is unbelievable and worth a heaping helping of praise. So kind of the mission and the frame of this episode is to figure out why. When we call this a perfect season of television, when we call this a pretty pitch perfect adaptation of a work of fantasy, what do we mean when we say that? When we call this a success, what do we mean? What makes this great? What makes it a great adaptation? So I've got a bunch of topics that we're going to hit, some examples along the way to try to unpack. If for the people who complained in the past about us, quote-unquote, glazing, you better strap the fuck in.
You better be ready.
We're opening a Krispy Kreme for the next half hour.
We're also going to be spoiling this whole show. So if you haven't watched yet, go watch it right now and then come back.
So the first beat to hit here is about success in terms of adaptation. And I think that always comes back to source material. You and I started trusting Ira Parker, who's the showrunner of this whole Dunk and Egg project that they're doing, because he constantly talks about fealty to the source material.
Yes.
And when he met George R. R. Martin, he talks about how a faithful adaptation was a phrase that was used so many times in those early discussions.
Yes, and we had heard from George, like on his blog and other places, where he had said that he was very involved in this show and that he was feeling like really good about it as being loyal to the material. And that was exciting to hear. But I got even more excited when I heard, straight from Ira Parker that he was dedicated to making this a faithful adaptation and was like showing respect and reverence for the source material, which I feel like should be the bare minimum for anybody adapting a story.
No shit.
Hey, speaking of Emerald Fennel, but and we've taught, like, not every adaptation has to be a perfect adaptation. Like, sometimes you can just kind of pull from something, but if you're gonna, this is a pretty straight adaptation, as in we're taking a story and translating it onto the screen. And I think that's what Hot D does not do well at all, and that's what Game of Thrones was unable to do because they didn't have source material anymore. And so this was like, you want this to be perfect because it's all right there, and they did it so well.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a different temperament, I think, to do adaptation, because usually the act of creating something, of creating a work of art, is sort of about the artist, about the person doing it. So you want to roll yourself and your experiences and your thoughts and feelings and reflections on the world to shape this thing. You're creating this other object that is all of you wrapped up in it. And the act of adaptation is, by comparison, selfless. It's not about you.
No.
It's about this other artist and their vision.
It's not
their angle on the world.
Right. It's not, what if I told my story in this pre-designed world? It's, I'm telling somebody else's story through my own interpretive and creative lens and abilities.
It's an act of staging. It's adaptation. It's creation, I guess.
Sure.
But it's on a much shorter leash.
Yes.
And you're not the sled dog pulling the sled, if that makes sense. And see how many metaphors I can roll through.
Well, right. And as we said before, I think that's a big reason why Game of Thrones, the whole show, changes so much, is because it becomes a different thing entirely. It's been this like short leashed, very loyal adaptation, and all of a sudden when that source material disappears, you're having to do totally different kind of work, which is part of why the show falls apart. I mean, we could get into other reasons, but that's not what today's episode is about. But it's nice that this was so respectful of that short leash, and I liked that a lot.
And I think this concept of fealty to the source material, it starts very simple. I noticed through the entire first episode just how many lines were taken verbatim from the Hedge Knight, and that sold me. That I garnered some trust in this whole endeavor. But I think fealty to the source material is kind of three different things.
Okay.
Because sometimes it's just references. It's nods to things that maybe we don't have the time on screen to fully represent or explore. Sometimes it's actual dialogue being ripped from the source material. And sometimes, and this is maybe the trickiest form, it's capturing the spirit of the source material.
Yes, that was the thing that stood out to me the most about this adaptation, because it wasn't just they're taking lines from the book, they're doing all the correct plot beats, because as we'll get into later, a lot of plot beats did change up and some dialogue attributions shift and some lines have changed a bit, but all in all, the thing that made me feel most like this is a perfect adaptation was the feeling. It captured that feeling of this story of the Hedge Knight, of it being light and peaceful and calm and tranquil, but also very serious and like heroic and emotionally invigorating at the same time in a way that the rest of the Game of Thrones story is not.
Yes, I was trying to exemplify this because I think I'm reaching for that same intangible thing that you're talking about. And the number one example that kept coming back to me of what I think this show does so well in capturing the spirit of George R. R. Martin's text is every time Dunk talks to one of the horses.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's incredibly sad and sweet and funny and light and serious and all these other tones and moods all at the same time. And that captures this totally unique flavor that these novellas have as opposed to anything in A Song of Ice and Fire or even Fire and Blood.
Yes. The horses are a great example because you don't get anything like that in Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. You obviously get people's connections with dire wolves and dragons, but those are much more like serious and symbolic and prophetic and like, intense compared to this, which is just Dunk is a sweet person having a like human moment with a horse, and like the plot slows down, and the point of the moment is not to hit a major plot point or to like have a prophetic moment about a character's fate. It's just, this is who Dunk is as a person. And I just think that was like the feeling overall is it's much more human and stripped down for better and for worse in terms of like the scope of humanity.
Then I think maybe the more simpler some
you have a master's degree.
Some of those simpler, more essential lines from the book, when I kind of knew some of them were going to be there. When Dunk looks into the crowd and yells, "Are there no true knights among you?"
Yeah, you expect that.
For me, that is the linchpin of the book. That is the emotional and thematic climax of the story. So I was fairly confident that line would be in the show. And by the time we got there, I thought they built to it perfectly.
Oh, yeah.
And the fog machine's going nuts all around this tourney. But it really was what Peter Claffey brought to that line.
Oh, my God.
It was this version of Dunk with this strangled, principled, kind of tormented heroism. I thought he nailed the delivery of it. And I'm trying to kind of illustrate this point because just having the great line from the book doesn't necessarily capture the spirit and the essence of the source material. It's more than just copy and paste.
I agree.
So this is where we get into casting. This is where we get into changes from the book and runtime and tone, all these other things I want to play with, because as much as we can say kind of this bumper sticker thing of fealty to the source material is the key to a great adaptation, it is more than that. Because A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms it exists in a different medium than the Hedge Knight does.
Of course.
So I want to talk about 6 changes from the book. And if you think of any along the way, please add them in.
Sure, okay.
But I tried to get the 6 that I felt mattered the most in making this such a great adaptation, in making this what I think we can agree is a perfect season of television.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into that.
The first one is the beefiest. And this is right, halfway through that finale, right when we think we're just landing the plane and doing things exactly as we expect, we see Egg take up this little cheese knife an attempt to kill his brother Aerion.
I was so intrigued. This was, I think, the biggest change by far, because a lot of the other changes, which we'll get into, either feel like reshuffling of concepts or characters, or throwing in a flashback to something to further, flesh out a character or an idea. But this was the first, like there is no hint of anything like this, at least in the Hedge Knight. I don't know about the other Dunk and Egg stories. We haven't read them yet. So maybe this is pulled from something that's more original or more George focused than we think, but this felt the most divergent. It was interesting, and at first I felt a little nervous about it right when it started. I was like, are they gonna have this child kill his brother in this show right now? But I thought, we're near the end of the finale, this wouldn't really match the tone, and so I was a little nervous about it. But then I'm curious what you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the question, right? Because it's a very different thing. And the immediate question is, why make a change? Mm-hmm. What is the point of this seemingly important divergence from the source material? And I think the only way to explain it is that it's part of dramatizing a story in a visual medium for an audience across multiple seasons. I think this is necessary for us to really understand the dangers of Egg staying with his family.
I see.
In the same way Dunk has that conversation with the brother where he thinks he's talking about Egg being a little monster. And the brother corrects Dunk and says, no, I'm talking about Aerion. He used to be normal. He liked fishing. And then he became a monster. And I'm sure that'll happen to Egg too. Those little moments are necessary, I think, in the medium of television, just to make this decision by Maekar, who has these conversations about, this is my last son. We just lost the heir to the throne. I have to go back to the king and tell him half his family's now dead, buried, or missing. And I think you have to really make necessary this crazy plan of a prince just running off and kind of... I mean, not abdicating, but not receiving that proper kingly training.
Right.
And again,
right.
I'm rewatching The Crown right now, and this idea is fucking. Imagine if they sent young little Charles, off with like a commoner, a peasant. They would all lose their shit.
Sure.
So I think you have to. Maekar is such a hard ass, and he's the belligerent, unflinching, unkind one. Baelor is the understanding one. If you pitch this to Baelor, I imagine he'd be fine with it without a conversation, without any convincing. I think these moments are necessary for Maekar. That look on his face when Egg sees his father in the corner there, the fear, the horror, the guilt.
Yeah, but also like the total understanding.
Yes.
Like that's why he doesn't like scold Aegon, like as most fathers would, like, why are you holding a knife to your brother's, face?
Yeah.
Like, but you see him like, it's such a good acting performance on the part of the guy playing Maekar, who was like, you can tell he totally gets why Egg is thinking of doing what he's going to do. And then also the sadness for both of his sons, sadness for Aerion, for the monster that he's become, and sadness for Aegon, who is feeling like he has to do something like this, and also the fear of what Aegon could become. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Also in the show, like, Maekar didn't seem quite as harsh in the book. He seemed a lot more like, not as like good-willed as Baelor, but a little bit more passive, a little bit more understanding and altruistic. Like, because in the book, as far as I remember, he willingly sends Aegon off to go with Dunk at the end. He's like, yeah, that actually makes sense. That's a good idea. And he sends him off. But I think they have to, for the show, really showcase the danger of the Targaryen family, especially for an audience that is so familiar with the tyrannical, horrible nature of the Targaryens.
I think you also have to help differentiate the Targaryens for the audience. If we're only going to be here for 6 episodes, and it seems like we're going to cycle out casts with each season of this show, you throw a bunch of freaky blonde people in one scene, you need some dramatic and tonal contrast between them so the audience doesn't get lost. Baelor, he's the nice one. Maekar, he's the prick. But also having this moment at the end where Maekar kind of gets scared straight and softens. You do that rug pull of he's not just another shitty Targaryen. He's a father out of his depth. You're giving the character an arc. You're giving him something to do, somewhere to go. I think this is essential for television. And also on a thematic level, it's a really brutal parallel because we find out that Maekar is the one who killed Baelor with his mace. He whacked him in the back of the head and that's why his brain fell out.
Not on purpose, but it happened.
So he's now watching history repeat itself. We talk about this all the time in George R. R. Martin, as well as Frank Herbert and all of our Dune discussions, is the constant thing in book analysis. but he's now seeing one of his sons try to kill his brother too.
I see, yeah.
So now he has this chance, kind of like he's been visited by 3 ghosts of, I can do something to change this future, to make sure this doesn't happen, and we don't have more and more fratricide and regicide and all these other familial horrors that we come to expect from Targaryens.
Sure. I think it also makes sense here too, like we talked about it in the context of Maekar, but it makes sense for Aegon as well, because in the novella and the story, we are very much in Dunk's POV. Like, he is our main character, and Egg is very important, but is a side character. He's the supporting actor role, right? And in this show, we've mostly been in Dunk's perspective as well, but I think you need to give Egg a little bit more depth and agency. I like that him going with Dunk at the end is his choice.
Yes, that's our second change.
Okay, and so I think like having him, think about and consider killing his own brother, not for the sake of, I think, personal reasons, but for the good of everybody else, like recognizing the danger that he is. I think it's also about Egg being afraid of who he could become, not wanting to be a Targaryen. That's why he's run away in the first place when he's off with Daeron. Like, he doesn't want to be a Targaryen. He is seeing the dangers of his family and like the monsters that his family can be, and is very afraid of that. And so I think him wanting to kill Aerion is about protecting everybody else, anger and revenge perhaps for Baelor, and also the damage it caused Dunk, but also he's trying to kill this part of himself. And so of course him not doing it is definitely the right call. You don't want him to kill his own brother, but then it's sort of like, okay, how does he sort of achieve this goal? How does he get away from and prevent becoming a monster? It's by going with Dunk.
I've seen some analysis online that this change of not having Maekar completely sign off on this removes a character beat from him, from his emotional arc.
Sure.
And I get that, but I also, watching it, I appreciated the humor of the moment, that we were kind of coming back down to the light, silly levity of the show that we began with. I thought it was a nice full circle moment. But also, I mean, just reading between the lines, if we're going to follow Dunk and Egg through Egg's adolescence and possibly even through the rest of his life, depending on how successful the show is, how many more novellas George R. R. Martin can pump out here, we're going to see the other Targaryens. He's going to visit with some of his... He will come across Maekar at some point. Mm-hmm. So I think leaving a couple breadcrumbs, a couple unfinished plot threads is good, because I expect he's the only character besides Dunk and Egg that we have a chance of seeing next season.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Even in some oblique way, maybe through a letter or something. So I think we need to give him a little something to do and not fully resolve his character. But also, I think it's a little bit bullshit, the readings I've been seeing about Maekar online here, because it's not like Dunk is going to abduct Egg.
No, of course not.
Maekar is now... He now has to make the tacit decision in between seasons to be okay with this. They're not fugitives.
Right. Yeah, they're not going to you're not going to be on the run. Yeah. Well, and I think also having Aegon choose to go with Dunk is a nice development of his character too, because earlier on in the show, in the season, he's very much, he's obviously very young. Dunk is our main character. Aegon is this, kind of misguided but eager young boy, but you see him kind of grow and mature over the course of these 6 episodes. And so I think ending his season 1 arc with him making this choice to, number 1, not kill his own brother, and number 2, and by extension, not become like the bad members of his family, and instead choose to go with this very honorable, honor-driven, altruistic, kind knight of Dunk. It makes a lot of sense for the arc of his character.
Totally. Yeah. The third change from the book that I thought was pretty important here was this tiny little riff in one of the first few episodes before Dunk is officially entered into the lists and he's got the cool armor on. Before that, when we're just kind of setting the table for all that, when the guy who does all the spitting comes up to him and says, hey, we'll give you some money if you take a dive in the next round of the tourney. Oh, So there's this kind of glint of corruption. We're going to get towards how cruel and corrupt this world is, but we're kind of introducing that theme through basically sports betting and
Right.
rigging. And I
Right.
liked that so much because, again, I thought it kind of Trojan horsed ideas about corruption that will pay off later when we see what shitheads the Targaryens are. But also, honestly, I think a reference to something like sports betting or rigging is a nice kind of head nod to the modern audience.
Say it's a very contemporary issue.
It's kind of speaking that language. And I think some of those, like adding a couple modern handholds to the rock wall of this weird fantasy text, I think that's wonderful. I mean, it's almost an accessibility argument.
Right.
I like that as a little bit of a reference just to kind of jolt the audience and make them feel a little comfortable.
Me too. And I don't, it's hard to say how intentional this really is because of all sorts of reasons. But I think it's interesting that a lot of these episodes of this show, that are about, these competitive sports and entertainment sports are airing around the same time and in the same weekend sometimes as the Super Bowl. And also I thought it was interesting that the episode that would have aired on Super Bowl Sunday aired early. But so that just meant that your Super Bowl audience was it meant that the audiences didn't have to overlap. But,
Sure.
But I thought that was, obviously it's like they're thinking about things way beyond just the Super Bowl, but it's still interesting. This idea of watching people hurt themselves and risk their lives and well-being on television for sport, for fun, while this larger corrupt system profits from, exploiting people through betting, while we're also watching it happen in this, fantasy medieval show. Really interesting. I liked it.
The synchronicity of it, pleasing.
Also, the Olympics are going right now.
Oh,
it's
sure.
it's a lot of things.
It was well timed.
Yeah, I liked it.
The fourth change from the book, it reminded me of some of my favorite parts of the Game of Thrones show while that was airing. And this is the wild new prominence of Lyonel Baratheon in the story.
Oh my God, I loved him so much. At first, I was like, again, when I say at first, it's like for 10 seconds, because immediately the show wins me over. But I was like, I don't remember him being hardly part of the show at all, or part of the book at all. Like, who is this guy? Why are we in his tent? But then I immediately loved him, and I thought it added to the flavor of the show, and I think it told us a lot about Dunk by contrast, because they're such different characters. He was a revelation.
The voice, the floppy hair, the beard,
earring.
the smile. He was such a hoot. He was a hot ticket. He was a tough cookie. He was just a wonderful character. And it reminded me of some of the kind of B or C level characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, who, when they're introduced on screen in a Game of Thrones, the audience is just ravenous for. We fall in love with. And we do give them these quiet narrative promotions over the course of subsequent seasons.
Right.
So then you have a character like Bronn not only be in every season, but be kind of big shit by the end of it.
Huge deal. Exactly.
And this felt like one of those. I mean, I know this isn't how it works. It's not like television is being written week to week and filmed week to week.
Of course.
But it felt like everyone fell in love with Lyonel so hard in the first episode that they immediately pushed to make him bigger and bigger through the rest of the season.
It does feel like that. Well, and it's interesting too, because it's not just fan service. It's not just he's interesting and like fun to watch and like adds entertainment value. I think he does a lot to sort of complicate the world, because Dunk enters this tournament as this naive, inexperienced but hopeful knight who was quickly beaten down by the harshness and corruption around him. But then Lyonel is this like interesting in between where he's very nice and welcoming to Dunk and like sort of lets him kind of, he becomes like a pseudo mentor, but he's not a super nice guy. He's very messy and is like obviously has an alcohol problem and like is, a bit of a scoundrel and, but he also has principles. And, at the end of the show, he offers Dunk an option to go work and live with him at Storm's End. But so he's sort of this in between where he's like kind of nasty, kind of slippery, but also very nice at the same time. And he challenges Dunk. And I think it's sort of a clue into, oh, this is what the world is like. Like, yes, it's full of evil Targaryens. And I seem to be the only truly good knight, but it's also full of guys like this who are more complicated. And I liked his presence a lot here.
And that he was the conduit for the discussion of Baelor and what could have been and how virtuous or condemnable all of the Targaryens are. It's not just that he was like comic relief, which is a term you and I have always sort of avoided in analysis.
Yeah.
But Lyonel Baratheon gets some of the best dramatic beats of the season as well. His battlefield knighting of Raymond Fossaway before the Trial of Seven is as serious and principled and heroic as anything we see in the rest of the show.
Totally, yeah. But then he also gets the most hilarious lines, and you get him in the last episode. What does he say to the maester? He says, like, you're fucking, he says, like,
fuck off, witch.
Yeah, he's like, you're the worst maester ever. It's so funny. Yeah, I thought he was a great addition. And I hope we see him again in season 2. I mean, I guess if Dunk is going to Dorne, like, I doubt it, but it'd be nice to see him again somehow.
I saw something about this online. I saw the actor Daniel Ings, I believe.
That sounds right, yeah.
He was talking to George R. R. Martin at one of these, press events, and I guess George was a fan too. I mean, I'm sure he liked the character already, but I think he loved this performance like we did. And he gave the actor a hint that the character comes back in later on in the story.
Oh, well, that's lovely.
And I think that means beyond the 3 published novellas.
Okay.
So maybe we'll see him a while from now.
Oh, I hope so, because he was a delight.
A glint of him on the horizon is good enough for me. I'll take the win. The 5th change from the book that I think is essential and important to the success of this show is the flashback sequence in episode 5.
And this was so funny, because you said earlier in this episode that every week the expectations were raised higher and higher, and therefore our fears and anxieties were raised. And we had sort of like heard rumors that there was some flashback stuff in episode 5, which is like the episode where it's the Trial of Seven takes place. And we were nervous because we were like, oh no, is it just going to like pad out the episode and take away from the drama of the fight? And it only served everything else going on in the show. I loved this flashback.
Why did it work for you?
Well, part of it was the stuff with the old man, and like, because that stuff is from the book. We don't see it in flashbacks necessarily, but a lot of the, Sir Arlen Penny Tree. I always want to say Penny Feather. I don't know why.
Of Penny Tree.
Thank you. That stuff is sprinkled throughout the novella, and so it's sprinkled throughout the show in different ways. So part of it's like, okay, that's true to the book. That's cool. I get it. But I thought that I liked learning about Dunk as a young child in Flea Bottom, because we learned that Sir Arlen sort of plucked Dunk out of this impoverished situation from the book, but that's about all we get. And I liked, especially because in the book, during the Trial of Seven, there's a line in the narration about how he was no longer Sir Duncan the Tall. Now he was Dunk of Flea Bottom, and he's like fighting for his life. And I think visually seeing that on screen and seeing not only the horrible, poverty that he's living in, but also the emotional relationship trauma that he experienced with his friendship with the young girl whose name I can't remember. Sorry. I thought that helped me understand who Dunk of Flea Bottom really was. I thought it was a beautiful inclusion. What did you think of it?
I think it was my favorite cutaway out of a flashback I've ever seen.
Oh, when he
the
says
cut
get
from
up.
the old man get up, and that being how he wakes up from these horrible, he gets killed like 38 times in that tourney. The number of mortal, like Frodo Baggins wounds that he takes in this fight, in this melee, that transition out, that kind of hard stop of the flashback, because I thought it was going to go longer. In the moment I was so invested in it, I was looking at all these other characters and seeing where it would go, and it snaps out of it in such a jarring but beautifully, instantly satisfying way.
Yeah.
It just became an all-timer for me. But I think what it did is kind of definitively repudiate the idea that Dunk is stupid. And that's this recurring insult and almost joke through the first few episodes, that he's kind of stupid and naive and polite, but doesn't really know what he's doing or what's going on.
Yeah, big blundering dumb guy. Yeah.
And I think that cheapens his levity. His warmth, his kindness, his trust, his generosity, knowing the horrors of his past, knowing that this person he loved and felt comfortable around had their neck cut open and all the fucking blood, and that it was that level of brutal, up there with any of the brutal kills we've ever seen in this franchise, but, happening to a child. I think that makes all of Dunk's later kindness and levity, and him doing the little dances in the tent with Lyonel Baratheon, that makes his levity heroic.
Yes, and all the more like impressive and astounding. Yeah.
Because it's not uninformed. He doesn't, it's not that he doesn't know how bad life can get.
He's not naive. Yeah.
It's that he's trying his hardest to find goodness and light in the world despite that knowledge.
Yes. And it's a really risky thing to do, to pause your, like, the crux, the climax of your dramatic action and start telling this story about our main character, but about a part of his life surrounded by other people who we don't know anything about. So to pause the dramatic action, introduce a new character, introduce a new storyline, that could very easily have been, I don't care about this. What are we doing? Get back to the action. But instead it was, I'm still very invested in what's happening in the story, even though I've read the book and I know what happens. I think even because I know, I was even more invested, right? So I'm still really, eager to get back to the fight. But I was also so quickly and immediately drawn into the story in the flashback because both young actors were doing such a beautiful job. The story was so heartbreaking and interesting, and the parallels were so fascinating that I was equally invested, and like you, got so caught up that when it jumped back into the present, into the get up thing, it was so jarring, but also so satisfying at the same time.
If anything, somehow it defied all storytelling logic and actually enhanced the pacing of the tourney or of the trial, because I just felt this shot of adrenaline when we went back to Dunk and he was getting up and there was mud and dirt and grime, and even the sound was muffled because his bell kept getting rung.
God.
And I think that's what he was feeling too.
I was going to say, it made sense plot-wise.
Yes.
Like, it wasn't just like, oh, this is a cool storytelling device, let's pause the action and go back and learn how we got here. It made sense for the story because it was a literal life flashing before his eyes. It's conceivable that he could have been knocked out and had a dream vision memory about a past traumatic thing that is thematically connected to what's happening now. So it made sense for plot, for character, for pacing, for storytelling, all of it made sense.
The second the flashback started, I was worried.
Same.
And we talked about this before. Every new episode is another chance to fuck it up. And we wanted to be able to say, this is perfect, wall to wall. They went 6 for 6. And I was so worried when we started the flashback. And the way it ended, I was just levitating above the couch. I couldn't believe how good it was.
And so then it made that final fight so much more rousing because you're remembering Dunk of Flea Bottom, you're remembering his friend who was killed, and you're remembering how much shit he's gone through, not to mention everything else that's happened in the previous 4 episodes. And so you're so deeply invested, and then when that final victory comes, it is that much more satisfying.
And the sixth major change from the book that I think makes this show so perfect and successful is kind of it ties a knot around all of the flashbacks we've just been talking about, and this kind of B plot with Sir Arlen and a young Dunk. And it's in the end of the finale where we find out that Dunk was never officially knighted. That
was a really interesting change. And I like it because when the story opens in the novella, we learn that Sir Arlen knighted Dunk right before he died. But I feel like when I read it, there was a little thing in the back of my mind that said, did he though? Or are you just that he would have, so you decided that's enough? And part of you thinks, well, no, because Dunk is so, honest and cares so much about, true chivalric values that of course he wouldn't lie about being knighted, the most important thing not to lie about. But on the other hand, he wants so badly to be a knight. You learn over the course of the story that Sir Arlen wasn't as great or amazing as Dunk really wanted him to be. And Dunk is pretty idealistic, again, not naive, but he's hopeful and idealistic. So it's very conceivable that he was never actually knighted and that he's just decided that that's good enough. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought this was incredibly effective. And I don't think it didn't ruin the ambiguity or the wink and the nod from the novel or the novella, because I think you could still read some ambiguity into it if you want to. It could be that he did the Frog King in Shrek and he died 3 different times and then kept talking.
Well, because you even see him almost die in one of the flashbacks.
Yeah,
and he's actually still alive.
And I saw an interview with Ira Parker on the Companion podcast where he was talking about maybe he did wake up again and knight him. I don't think it resolves anything as much as it highlights that it doesn't really fucking matter. In the same way, that unbelievable line from the novella of Dunk is basically the only knight who's ever kept his vows.
Yes.
And that's why he's so special. if none of the other knights who were knighted keep their vows, then what does the knighting matter for making a good knight?
Exactly, because I mean, it's calling into question the idea of what is a true knight. Is it somebody who goes through all the proper procedures and is technically knighted and wears the right armor and wins the tourneys? Or is it somebody who keeps the vows, protects the innocent, like, and is chivalric and defends everybody? Like, especially, it's interesting too, because I'm remembering now, in the show, Dunk won't knight Sir the Apple Kid. What's his name?
Raymond Fossoway.
Thank you. I can
Apple Kid.
I can never remember that.
He's a hero.
Name. I love him. Can't remember his name. Neville Longbottom.
Yeah.
When like they're about to start, he's like, "Knight me," and Dunk's like, and he doesn't want to do it. And you watch it first thinking, oh, he's like too anxious about the fight and like getting somebody else to help that he won't do it. But now you're like, he's realizing I can't because I'm not actually a knight, but he can't tell anybody that. But you're right. At the end, it doesn't matter. The point is that Dunk has proved himself to be a true knight by honoring his vows, by fighting for the right causes, and by like winning a major battle. Like that's what matters.
And I think part of that silly kind of cutaway title card we get where it updates to a Knight of the Nine Kingdoms, I think that's kind of underlining this point.
Yes.
Because if the title is a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, we find out that Dunk's not really a knight, and they aren't really seven kingdoms.
Right.
So if it's all bullshit and foo-foo and none of it matters anyway,
It's whatever you want it to be.
then who cares?
Yeah.
Let's just follow the noble, funny, goofy idealist on these wonderful adventures and not take it so seriously.
Right. Dunk is more of a knight than any of the Targaryen princes ever will be, because they, except for Egg, obviously, but because they are so, they don't keep their vows. They don't represent any of these knightly values. They're evil. And yeah, they have royal blood, but like, that's it. It's, so I thought that was a really fantastic choice. I'm a fan.
Yeah. So those are the 6, I think, most important changes from the novella. A couple structural things I want to play with here.
Oh, okay.
One is the presentation of this show in 6 episodes instead of 10 or 8 or whatever else we've gotten. I know Game of Thrones got down to 6 by the end, but those were hour-and-a-half long episodes.
Yeah, they were long.
It's a different thing.
Yeah.
Doing 6 half-hour episodes, what role do you think that played in making this show such a success for us?
Well, it makes sense to have fewer because it is novella. It's much less, plot and story to get through compared to season 1 of the Game of Thrones, which is only 4 episodes more than this, but covers way more plot. Of course, the episodes are longer and everything's just more densely packed, but it's a different kind of thing. So the number of episodes makes sense. I also liked that they were shorter because I think this show had a truly episodic structure. And I think that sort of, again, it doesn't minimize the drama, but it feels less like, an hour is a long time for a drama, especially a well-done drama that knows how to pace things well. An hour is a long time. And I think I'm glad that this show didn't try to stretch every episode into an hour. I think, and the times varied quite a bit. Some were about 30, some were closer to 40 or 45. And I like that it allowed each episode to be as long as it needed to be.
Because how would this show have been different if they'd done 6-hour-long episodes?
I just don't know what they would have done for the extra time.
They would have
almost
added
twice
more.
as long.
I think they would have stretched.
Yeah.
It would have been more inventing, more padding, more side questy shit to fill in the gaps.
Or they would have tried to combine one of the other Dunk novellas or something, and which wouldn't have worked at all.
It wouldn't have the purity of vision that this season does, where it's exactly one story, meaning it's one complete story and nothing else. We're bucking the trend of all of these other franchise shows where the last episode isn't laying all of the seeds for what's going to happen in the next season. It's not the falling action after the big Game of Thrones episode 9, everyone's gotten beheaded. We're not setting up the new normal for the next season. We're only resolving what we've seen.
Right. And of course there is a hint towards what could come next, but that's also how the story ends. But but you're right, we're not going to, except for Dunk, Egg, and maybe Lyonel at some point, and maybe Maekar at some point, we're not going to see anybody else from this story after this. Everything's cleanly wrapped up. Raymond Fossoway, Apple Kid, goes off with his horse. Everything kind of ends and separates. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that it's not like these 6 episodes were super, super dense. They take their time, but that's the energy of this story, like we laid out at the beginning. There are times where we're just kind of watching Dunk walk around the camps at the tourney and learn about the world around him and talk to a couple people, dance with with Lyonel Baratheon in his tent for a while, get a little drunk, meet some side characters. But we're not wasting time, but we're also not like go, 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 the way we are in something like Game of Thrones.
The show should have a different pace because the novella has a different pace.
Exactly.
And I loved that this show, with these half-hour chunks, you mentioned 60 minutes is a long time for drama. It's an eternity for comedy.
Yeah.
And I think the moments
That's true, yeah.
Name a 60-minute comedy.
There
it's
aren't
impossible.
any. You can't
right.
sustain that for 60 minutes. Yeah, all comedies are, they're like half an hour.
But I think it's also the moments where you can breathe and do these quieter character moments. If you do that for an hour, even we're going to start checking our watches.
Yeah, it's going to feel like House of the Dragon Season 2 where nothing's happening.
But the moments... Yeah, exactly. Oof.
But in the
train wreck.
worst way, yeah.
But having the moments of like Dunk and Egg making the little Egg McMuffins.
Holy
like
shit.
the best breakfast sandwich you've
Do
ever
you know how
imagined.
much I want to eat that sandwich? I want to eat that sandwich so bad.
Or having the slow, kind of careful, delicate conversation between Dunk and the armor.
Oh, yeah.
After Tansel leaves.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's such a beautiful, nuanced conversation. It's so much about glances and looks and silences that just having a half hour of this part of the story and then getting to chew on it for 6 days, it felt perfect for me.
Yes, I agree. And watching it week to week was lovely too, just because, when I read the novella, I read it in like 2 or 3 days, in pretty like dense reading sessions. I was reading closely, so I was taking my time, but this was nice to kind of spread the story out and just marinate in it for a while and just enjoy being in the world in a way that we haven't been able to relax in a while. It was nice.
Is there anything to say about the casting of the show beyond it being great?
It was just perfect. No
it's
notes.
incredible. I think maybe the consistency is the thing here because yes, this is Dunk and Egg. It is this odd couple, big guy, little guy pairing. Mm-hmm. But the whole ensemble is fantastic.
Yes. And I'm really impressed at the actor playing Egg. I looked him up. His name is Dexter Sol Ansel. He right now is 11. So at the time of filming, he was probably like, 10. He's got such a nuanced performance. He's not just like cute, innocent kid. Like you can see he's doing a lot of emotional work on his face. And even the scene where he's got the knife going up to his brother, he's not just like you're getting fear, you're getting sadness, you're getting anxiety, you're getting like preemptive regret, but also determination at the same time. Like he's conveying so much on his face. I thought he was, obviously Peter Claffey is like perfect and like of course.
A revelation.
But this kid was stunning. And then what I really liked about him, honestly, was at the end of each episode, there's always a little inside the episode, featurette after. And usually those aren't that great. It's like they're just recapping the plot. You're like, yeah, I know this is a big moment for Dunk. Thank you for telling me that. But like,
we did fall in love with the directors, though.
Well, yes,
the two directors for this whole season.
Yes, because they're
admirable.
Excellent. Also, Ira Parker, of course. But I thought that the way that this kid playing Egg described what was happening was more insightful than any of the other actors talking. We ended it saying, like, we often watch these and we're like, actors are dumb. Like they do amazing work, but they're not always great at articulating what's happening with their character. They're great at doing it, but articulating it is another thing entirely. I thought this kid was incredibly like thoughtful and just aware and like deeply invested in his character and the story. Like he's a really good actor.
You're reminding me of something we both kind of hypothesized and wondered about in the episode we did about the Hedge Knight a couple weeks ago in anticipation of this show, when we talked about the novella front to back all in one episode, did our usual close reading analysis. And we were wondering or hoping if this show could become to fantasy what The Mandalorian was to sci-fi.
Yes,
and I
right.
think the only way I would modify that, because I think it can be in its simplicity, in its it feels like a fable. You can drift into different genres for these bite-sized, easily digestible kind of tall tales. The thing that differentiates Dunk and Egg from The Mandalorian is Egg. Because if he was Grogu, he would just be cute.
Right.
And what we see him do in that confrontation with Aerion and ultimately with his father, Maekar, in the finale is real dramatic chops performance.
Yes.
And that is not something we're ever going to see from a puppet.
Right. From a little puppet. Exactly. Yeah, that's a great comparison. He was a revelation. Loved him.
One of the things that we admired most about the novella in that verse discussion was the tone, because it's a hard tone. I don't think you can describe it in one word.
No.
And I think the show does a beautiful job of exploring all the different angles of that. Never mind capturing that intangible tone. The show starts as a comedy. We have like a shit joke in the first 60 seconds, and it's great.
It's like a fake out, like you think you're going to go into the Game of Thrones, like opening credits,
Yeah.
and then it's just shitting behind a tree.
It's great. And then you have the guy
incredible.
spitting, the guy who's helping, teaching him about the tourney and the lists.
Yes,
The guy who
yes.
keeps hucking loogies the whole time.
Yeah.
The comedy of it is wonderful. And then I think if it's 6 episodes, we can roughly break it into thirds. You start with the comedy, you build into the principle. This is where you learn who Dunk is and what a hero he can be. It's the hope, it's the generosity, the honor, what being a knight actually means to him. And then we have these last 2 episodes, loosely. I'm fast and loose with the breaking it into 3s. And this is the battle sequences. What do you make of the tone of the combat in this show as opposed to Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon?
I thought the combat in this show was some of the best filmed combat I've ever seen. I mean, you see it even at the beginning of the show. Like, I think it's the end of the first episode or the second where you see the jousting for the first time. The choice to do the jousting at night and then to have it be all of them at once, I thought, like, just from like a technical logistical standpoint, it must have been a fucking nightmare to shoot. I can't even imagine. But it was so dynamic, and I think it was the same director. They just had 2 directors for this show, and one of them kind of did the more actiony ones, and one of them did kind of the more like charactery ones.
It was episodes 1, 2, and 5,
Yep.
and the other one did 3, 4, and 6.
Yes. And so the director who was doing the more action focused episodes, it was so like I felt like I was part of the action. I mean, and the times that I've really felt like that in Game of Thrones I'm thinking of like Battle of the Bastards. Like that is obviously a standout like battle episode and is fantastically, it involves the viewer so intensely. And I think this was similar to that, but it also wasn't imitating that at all, because that has this grand epic scale in a way that this doesn't. But this felt so character focused. Like that's why I liked it, is because we got POV shots from Dunk during the trial. We're moving with the horses as they run and as they turn. We're moving with characters as they're knocked off their horses. We're seeing the just this word is annoying, but this clusterfuck of what's happening, of like all of the noises and the confusion and and then the sound going out, and it's all dark and muddy and you can't see out of your helmet. Like it all felt so crunchy, and I felt so trapped in it along with the characters.
You felt battered. It was like a bumper cars experience where every impact, all of these death blows that hit Dunk, you feel all of them.
Versus some other types of action sequences I think in Game of Thrones and even in House of the Dragon are much more like, look how cool this is. Look how cool the dragons are. Look how great of a swordsman Jon Snow is. Look how awesome of an archer Ygritte is. Like, look how intense the wildlings are. And that's all really effective too for a different kind of storytelling. But this was so like scary and gritty and hard to wrap your head around and disorienting, which makes perfect sense for Dunk, who's never been in a real combat situation before. I thought it was beautifully done.
I really like that framing. And thinking of this like small, medium, and large, I think the large scale combat or battle sequences involve the dragons. I think it's incredibly hard to make any of the dragon sequences feel personal or immersive, or that they have any real stakes.
Right, because you have to be so zoomed out.
Yeah,
you get to be able to see the whole board.
The scale, the grandeur of the thing, it's just too big. I mean, I think that's, to compare it, I guess, to something like Lord of the Rings, those battle sequences are always big, huge in scope, scale, and grandeur.
Right.
And then I think the medium scale would be something like Hard Home or Battle of the Bastards, where, yes, you see all the wide shots of these larger fights, but we do feel very close to Jon.
Yes.
In moments. Not the whole way through, but we do zoom in on him more than anyone else.
Right.
And I think the innovation of this show is the small scale combat, where we are so in Dunk's POV. When we got the first shot from inside his helmet, just the slit in the visor,
Holy shit,
looking
yeah.
out. Maybe I've seen that before. You and I have devoured a lot of fantasy in our time.
Yeah.
But I don't remember it ever hitting me like it did this time. And this is a guy who's 50 feet tall.
I know, he's huge and
I
very
just
capable.
felt terrified for him.
Right. And it's interesting too, because in all these other combat things we're talking about, those are moments that are like actual real battles in combat. This is like entertainment for fun. I mean, the Trial of the Seven is different because it's like it's an actual trial and there's like a legality thing to it. It's not just for fun, but
there are spectators in the stands.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone's gathered around to watch and bet on it and profit from it and, you know, be entertained by it. And so it's this contrast, especially when, you know, Dunk has entered this thing hoping to win, and he's not naive. He knows it's going to be difficult and dangerous and he could die during this, but it's a whole new thing when it actually starts. And I think even watching the jousting for the first time, we're so involved in it, and we imagine ourselves in the battle because Dunk is imagining himself in this tourney. Like, even though he's not competing in this first jousting thing, he's picturing himself and going like, oh shit, like this is going to be very difficult and very dangerous, and I'm way out of my depth. And so we feel that with him.
I feel like the whole production is designed around this small scale conflict and battle sequences because the armor was more beautiful and luxurious and detailed in the same. If you have a big, huge dragon battle in Game of Thrones where you're going to have tons of wide shots and millions of extras running around the background, you're not going to be able to make every single bit of armor perfect.
No.
But because there were fewer pieces on the board this time, I just thought the detail was astounding. Aerion's helmet.
Oh my God.
The horses' helmets.
Well, and every knight had to be distinguishable. It's not like I'm one knight in an army of thousands. It's I'm a single knight competing for a spot in this tournament. So you have to be able to like visually distinguish everybody who's on screen. But not only like for our purposes, like for storytelling, but like character-wise, story-wise, the knights themselves have to distinguish themselves amongst the others in this tourney to stand out, to be, you know, admirable, to be favorites, to be bet on, you know, and so they all have to stand out. And so the detail was staggering. I mean, I was just thrilled that the Kingsguard were actually wearing white.
I was just going to bring that up.
Like their armor was actually white. It wasn't like kind of gray, like everything in the rest of the show. Like I loved to see that. It was so cool. And
the
like,
armor was fantastic throughout.
And it just helped distinguish this time period from the others. Like, it's not just this is a different version of the Westeros world that you love. It was also like, this isn't the same time period as the Game of Thrones story or the House of the Dragon story. So the clothes are different. The armor is different. There's a slightly, there's a different visual style going on. I thought that was great.
To zoom out, as we close things out here, I want to zoom out to a franchise level discussion. Because this season exists at such an interesting moment for this larger, I guess, Westeros franchise. Yeah. I don't know what to call the whole thing.
Because it's not even a Song of Ice and Fire, because House of the Dragon is not during that saga.
Right. So it's Game of Thrones without the
Yeah,
it's
right.
just about the show.
Right.
And you have this very fractured legacy of Game of Thrones, where most people wrote it off because they didn't like the last season, and now they just don't talk about it. Mm-hmm. It has a weird... It's kind of like forbidden to talk about the show
thing.
now.
It's
or
like, oh, well, Game of Thrones.
Or if you talk about it, you have to immediately talk about the shitty ending.
Yeah, be like, I love Game of Thrones, but of course, I also hated season 8,
Right, exactly. Yes, it's a weird asterisk in every conversation about the show now, which sucks, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
House of the Dragon, amazing first scene. And I think that first season hit as hard as this did at the time because we were still reeling from Game of Thrones.
Yes, right.
But season 2 was such a train wreck, and we covered that episode by episode. If you want to check that out,
you heard all about
on
it
the channel, on the podcast feed, that's all there. But we're existing at such an interesting crossroads right now, where I feel like Knight of the Seven Kingdoms shows up as a path forward, not just a new vision for the franchise, but a very old vision for the franchise, because almost everything you and I have complimented about this season, you could say about the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones.
I was going to say, we said a lot of these similar things a few weeks ago when we rewatched and discussed season 1 of Game of Thrones as an adaptation. Like, yeah, it feels like it's sort of almost a betrayal of like, we could have been doing this the whole time. Like, I often think about, before we rewatched season 1 recently, I would often think back to early Game of Thrones and think, was it actually that good? Or was I just 20 years old and like had never seen a drama that good before? Like, was I just like, blinded by how good the story is? Was I, mixing up, because I was also reading the books at the same time. I was like, was I conflating the two? Were my opinions of shows like not as good or nuanced or informed as they are now? And watching it back, the answer is no, it was that great. But also seeing something like this tells me, oh no, the show, like shows like this can be great. They stopped being great for all kinds of reasons, but it's that art, that like level of excellence is not lost. It is still very much possible.
There was a beautiful headline, I think after the first or second episode of this season, I forget which mainstream publication it was, that said, Night of the Seven Kingdoms reminds us that the magic of this franchise wasn't the dragons, it's George R.R. Martin.
Yeah.
And I think as much as we can compliment the cast and the crew and the tone and the armor and the runtime and all of these beautiful little adaptation changes and decisions that they're making along the way, the headline of the success of this season is the fealty to the source material.
Yes,
and that
absolutely.
has to be the lesson for the other properties in this universe going forward. Whether it's an Aegon's Conquest show or movie,
right.
Whether it's the rest of House of the Dragon,
right.
This has to be the thesis statement going forward.
And I think not even just for Game of Thrones, but for all sorts of adaptations. I mean, we talked about Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein as being a really excellent Frankenstein adaptation last fall. And Frankenstein, I think, is famously one of the hardest stories to adapt. And Guillermo del Toro made a lot of changes to his version. But again, changes doesn't mean it's not a good adaptation. In fact, it can often mean it's a great adaptation like we've laid out here. So I hope that this is sort of a lesson learned, especially thinking about Wuthering Heights, and not only how much you and I didn't like it, but how much a lot of people have really been frustrated by that, not only because it's not a strong adaptation, but because it, not just like in terms of like accuracy, like book accuracy, but because it flattens and almost disrespects a lot of the great things about the source material. I hope that we're sort of entering an era of faithful, thoughtful, intelligent adaptation going forward.
Yes, we need to move past House of the Dragon Season 2 and the Netflix Witcher disaster.
I forgot about The Witcher.
The next era of big budget genre adaptations needs to be Night of the Seven Kingdoms. You were telling me the other day about Brandon Sanderson's deal with Apple.
Uh-huh.
That seems to be building on this momentum.
Certainly, yeah. Brandon Sanderson, as far as I understand it, his level of involvement in these adaptations of his Cosmere series
is a new deal with Apple.
Yeah, his level of involvement is like unprecedented. Like he gets so much say and involvement, and sort of like, I guess, respect compared to what, I mean, it's beyond what George R.R. Martin's even getting now. It's beyond what J.K. Rowling ever got with Harry Potter. Like,
he'll be writing on all the projects. He'll be signing off on all the projects.
And not as a like way to police the thing, but just to ensure that what's being put on the screen is faithful to his creative vision of this world. And I believe that he is a strong enough storyteller in the little of his books that I've read, and just knowing about him as a person. I think Brandon Sanderson is a strong enough storyteller that he will be okay with and encouraging of changes to the screen, because he understands that we're trying to tell a story here. We're not just trying to translate exactly what I wrote on the page and make it visual. It's how am I translating the experience of reading this story into a visual experience. And I think he'll be positive and creative and collaborative in that way. And that's certainly what George R.R. Martin was doing here with Night of the Seven Kingdoms. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
Hats off to this as a new precedent. And I think Ira Parker as a shepherd for that new precedent.
Yeah.
What a phenomenal 6 weeks we've had with this show.
Also, I've been like foaming at the mouth waiting for the soundtrack, the score to come out, because the music has been so understated and beautiful. And it's not Ramin Djawadi, it's a different composer, and I think that is good for this show, even though we had a couple moments where some Game of Thrones themes came up in the music, which was like so satisfying. But I've been like dying to listen to this music, and I forgot to check today because the show aired yesterday, but I need to check Spotify and see if it's out so that I can listen to it, because it hasn't been out because the show hasn't been finished yet. But it's such beautiful music, and it adds so much to the world.
And as Maggie referenced earlier, if you want more adaptation discussion from us, a couple weeks ago ago, we talked about the first season of Game of Thrones, rewatching that last week. We just talked about Wuthering Heights. We saw the movie and then I read the book. So we talk about it on its own as a movie and then as an adaptation. That's a rough discussion.
Plus, we're going chapter by chapter through A Clash of Kings right now.
Right. So we've done chapter by chapter through all of A Game of Thrones. Over on the Patreon, we did a series going chapter by chapter through Fire and Blood. We've also done all of Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, all of The Witcher. We're going book by book through Dune. And right now, we've just started, we're a couple episodes in to our grand journey through A Clash of Kings, the second book in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
The next episode in that series will drop this Friday.
That's right. Yeah, we're doing 2 chapters at a time every 2 weeks, so do go check those out. Let us know what you thought of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. That's really hard to say. Dunkin' Egg. What did you think of the Dunkin' Egg show? That's what I'm calling it.
I liked it.
Thank you, Cam. I couldn't tell after the hour-long discussion we just had. Listener, let us know what you thought. If you're on YouTube, you can comment down below. If you're listening on a podcast platform, send us an email at secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com or send us a DM on Instagram. Also, may I recommend you check out Cam's latest book, Lemon Tarts in Space. If you didn't know, Cam is an author, a very, very talented author. Lemon Tarts in Space is a light sci-fi dark comedy. Think of it as Ridley Scott's Alien meets Monty Python, or Friday the 13th meets Flubber. Genuinely, that's the vibe of this book. It's so funny and dark and moving and emotional all in one. You can read it as a regular book, or you can check out the fully produced audio drama, which is full of trauma.
We also did an interview episode about adapting the novel into the audio drama into the novel.
Yes, because you wrote the audio drama first. Yeah.
Variations on a theme. We've done 600 episodes. We have some grindstones.
We got lots of stuff in there.
Back to.
Go check it all out. Thank you for listening to the end. Click everything to tell the robots in charge that you like our stuff so that we can keep making stuff. And we'll catch you here next time with a brand new episode.